Hello. We continue a series which is close to my heart about the spiritual teacher as a component of the spiritual path. I spent quite a bit of time in this building as a child. I sat where you're sitting now in different chairs. Remember those chairs? They were terrible.
They were hard.
They were awful chairs. There's no padding, awful wooden chairs with just the wrong slope in them so that you couldn't sit up or slouch. You could do neither. You just had to be uncomfortable the whole time. And so you can imagine me as a 10-year-old, as a teenager, doing my best to slouch in the chairs that wouldn't allow it, and wondered about, well, really the thing I was wondering about was what's wrong with us. Like many teenagers, I was frustrated with the way people are, and I wondered what's the problem with us. And what that meant was what's wrong with me. And I didn't know. I couldn't figure it out. It took me a long time to find someone who could explain that to me, who could help me out with that problem, who could help me to understand my question and then come to terms with the answer. But it was in meeting someone. It was in a direct personal relationship with someone that question was answered, that answer was questioned, and that a basic shift occurred in my heart. A lot of the time when we consider the spiritual path, we think, well, what book should I read? What technique should I use? And a lot of the time, we have the sense that the path that we will take is somehow contained in a book, that there's some formula, and if we could just apply that formula to our lives, to our minds, to ourselves, then our problems would be solved. And of course, there's a certain amount of validity in this. There are formulas, there are stock answers that we can learn, and they can help us. And it's actually interesting because when I went to Japan to find someone who could help me to understand why people are so mean, which is the question I had, why are people so mean? When I went there, I had already met a number of teachers who had a lot of very good things to teach me, and I was appreciative for that, but I hadn't found the connection that I needed in order to stay with any of them. And so I traveled and traveled and traveled until I found a certain teacher and met him and asked him my questions. And the answers that he gave were the least impressive answers I had ever received to any questions that I had ever asked anyone in my life. I was struck by how worthless the answers were. And one of the things that I was thinking while sitting in front of this Zen master, while hearing him talk to me in very simple terms about the path, his answers were short and boring, which is something of an achievement. Usually it's just the long answers that get boring, but even these short answers were boring. And while I was being bored by his short and not deep answers. His very straightforward answers that were clear and I don't know what word to use other than ordinary, but they were, what's a more ordinary word than ordinary?
Mediocre.
Plain.
Plain.
Unspecial.
Unspecial, mundane.
Bland.
Yeah. Bland, they were bland, yes. Unspecial, maybe? Everything special wasn't there. Let's put it that way. So, while I was listening to him, I wasn't really paying attention to what he was saying, because it clearly wasn't worth paying attention to. I just had to get through the tea and leave, and find a real teacher, you know. I remember thinking, wow, he's just reciting stuff out of Zen books. I could read all this in a book. Everything he's saying right now I could get out of a book. And it would be more eloquent in the book. It would be more interesting to read, and I think that there would be more helpful advice accompanying these stock Zen things that all the Zen people seem to say. So maybe I should just get a book, because this guy obviously doesn't have anything in particular to share. Okay, so fine. So the tea ended, which was great, and he left, and I left. And soon after leaving, I realized that I was completely without bearings. I no longer had a good way to make decisions. I didn't know what to do with my life anymore. It wasn't a good experience. It wasn't fun. It wasn't, you say, liberating. I just noticed that this general hatred I had for everyone, which had been the basis of my decisions for many years, was gone. And now I didn't know what to do with my life anymore. There wasn't a clear way of understanding how to do anything, actually. Even how to get back to the house where I was staying. Because the only reason to go to the house would be to find another temple to go to where I could get my questions answered. But I wanted to answer these questions because I wanted to fix people, because they're bad. And this was a natural, and to fix people is a natural expression of hatred. So I didn't have the desire to fix people. So why go back to this place? And there would be nothing to do there. So I just stood there on the street. I was confused. I didn't even have much of a motivation to unconfuse myself, because why would you? Nothing matters. There's just nothing makes any difference anymore. Eventually I made it back to the house, and the days passed. And something had changed. And I didn't know what, and I didn't know why. I didn't know why anything had changed. It wasn't clear to me. What happened that day that I went to that temple and sat with that guy? Something must have happened on that day that made my life change. I wonder what. Maybe I ate something different for breakfast, or maybe my dad was right and I just had hormone problems, which is why I was so angry. And the hormones changed on that day. Maybe, because I was young, I was a teenager at this point. I was just a kid, you know. So I still had hormone shifts, and it makes sense. Maybe that changed, or maybe the weather changed on that day. I don't know what it was that happened on the day that I went to that temple that would have made this change happen. And it took me weeks to acknowledge that you have to consider the possibility anyway, even though all of the evidence is to the contrary, that it may have been that meeting with that, you know, boring talking book. that may have predicated this shift. So reluctantly, I considered the possibility of going back to that temple, and well, here we are. So this story matters because nothing he said, not a single word he said, was better, more useful than what most people here have read in books. Maybe everyone here has read spiritual advice in books that, and that advice, in terms of the words used, the words that you read, that advice was better, more eloquent, more useful, more powerful, better thought through. Whatever good things you want to say, you can say it in your head and it'll work. Everything better in what you read than in what he said on that day. And this really matters. This really matters. It matters so much that I'm not going to explain it further. It's essential to look at this with everything we have. So now I'm moving on. Look at this. Consider this very carefully. You have read things that are great. You can meet a person who's enlightened, and they'll say things that aren't as good as that. Okay? So look at that very closely. Ask, which would you rather have? Which is more important? All right, moving on. So I've been giving these talks on gurus, on spiritual teachers, for the past few weeks, and now it's your job to figure out how that story applies. You can do it. How does the story I just told apply to these talks? It's the central story about these talks, so consider it carefully. Some of the responses I've gotten have been quite interesting to me. You know, a lot of interesting responses have come. Really interesting stuff. So I'll just say two of the things that people have said that have surprised me and have supported my view that we have been in some strange way brainwashed into thinking that gurus, that spiritual teachers, that organizations led by spiritual teachers are ineffective or bad or unethical. And we hear talks like this, and it's as if some part of our mind is trying to defend ourselves from the talk in order to not need to give up those perspectives. But two of the things that I've heard, or one, I said that if you consider all of the organizations on the planet, say the top 100 organizations on the planet that are doing harm, that are causing the greatest harm, I'd suggest that not one of them is a guru-based organization. Not a single one. Make your list of the top 100 organizations destroying life, etc., however you want to look at it. None of those organizations are run by these spiritual teachers, these often charismatic, these spiritual powerhouses, you know, these strong spiritual figures. Not one of those organizations is led by such a person. And so one of the responses that someone told me was, well, obviously, of course that's the case. That's a very weak argument. This is not a good argument. Right? Isn't that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you say that? am I getting it right? You want to add anything?
No, that's good.
Because the reason is that, well, if you have an organizational structure like that, the organizations aren't going to get very big. You can't have a large multinational organization based on a spiritual leader. Because that spiritual leader, in order to connect to, in order to teach, in order to have a personal relationship with all of the people in the organization, has to limit the size of the organization. And so it can't be a big organization, so it can't do a whole lot of harm. Right? So it's not a strong argument. But I thought, what? That is exactly the point I'm making, is that you have these organizations that are where the structure itself requires that at least one person in the organization, the guru, knows everyone in the organization, and everyone knows at least that person, because that's exactly the offering that's given, the personal relationship. And so there's a limitation to the size, the scope, and the power of the organization, which is exactly the way it should be. One of the main issues with a huge multinational organization is that no one knows anyone. So nobody's looking at anyone. No one's watching anyone's ethics. No one's watching anyone's morality because no one is there. Everyone's numbers, and the thing at the top, the organization, is just a fictional legal entity. There's no one there. So no one's watching whoever's in charge. No one knows who that is. It's someone up there who I don't know, maybe, unless it isn't really them, because it's something else. I don't know. I just work here. If you have this anonymous, heartless organizational structure, it's not surprising that on the one hand, that organization will get very, very big, and on the other hand, that ethics in it will become flimsy. If you have this situation where someone is expected to embody the values of the organization, and everyone has to know that person personally, and is constantly watching them, and then you have a small enough number of people that heart, connection, relationship, is still a part of the organization. Therefore, it's a better organization. It would be good if all organizations had this limitation on their scope, their size, their power. I suggest the world would be a better place that way, rather than these vast structures that just eat the world, and no one knows who's doing it. But in this case, you know exactly who's doing it. There's someone who's at the center of it, who's being watched constantly by everyone. And they can watch them because they actually know them. Actually know the person. This matters. And I know it's confusing because here we think, well, I'll just buy a book and learn spirituality. But in the way that I've learned spirituality, both in terms of Zen, which has impacted me greatly, and in terms of the native traditions that I've studied in, book learning is looked upon with enormous suspicion. So in Zen, the written word is not just, it's called the dead teaching. Yes? So if you can write it down, you killed it. If the part of the path that you can write down is the dead part of the path. The part of the path that you will walk is the part that has never been written down. The thing that you will do has never been written down. The living part of this teaching is the part that has never been written down. Once it's written down, you have proven that that part of the path is lifeless. You've demonstrated that by writing it down. But there's something alive that isn't written down. That part, though, can be experienced together in a heart-to-heart relationship. That heart-to-heart relationship matters. That heart-to-heart relationship carries morality, ethics, and wisdom. It carries it alive, so it's alive. And that living wisdom and compassion is the part of the path that cares for the living world. That's the part that matters. It has to stay alive, and that can stay alive within these personal relationships. In order to do that, there has to be a limitation on the amount of power that an organization can have, because it isn't the case that it's best if organizations just have as much power as possible. A good organization is one in which the amount of power that the organization has is equivalent to the amount of wisdom and compassion that that organization has. If an organization has a lot of wisdom and compassion and not much power, that's not ideal. It would be better if they had more power. Better for the world, better for them, better for everyone if they had more power. If they have a lot of power, not much wisdom and compassion, that's not good for the world because they're going to use that power for bad things, which is the norm nowadays. So you want some structure in which the structure itself, not just, well, I wish it would be this way, why doesn't someone do something about this? Not that, but the structure itself enforces this equivalence, this mutual support between wisdom, love, and power. These should be held together, and this organizational structure does that. So the thing that I said to our friend, who was suggesting that this isn't a very powerful argument, the direct quote was, checkmate. That's what I said. But because we forget, because we modern people who, like, do you know, this, most of us here are able to be here. We're speaking English. We're speaking English. English isn't from here. We're on Abenaki land right now. We are here speaking English because of the written word. Because of these treaties that we wrote. You have to look upon the written word with enormous suspicion. And this is really hard for me because I worked on a Navajo res for a while. And I faced at the time how deeply I trust the written word. I wanted contracts. I'm going to do this work. This is the scope of my work. This is how much you're going to pay me. This is when you're going to pay me. This is how I'm going to do the work. This is the circumstance under which I can't do the work, which means da 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 da. I want it all written down, and that made me feel so comfortable. That, yes, the written word. And they felt like, hold on here. We don't even know you. I mean, we need to get to know each other here. We've come to live in a system in which it's assumed that everything should be able to be written down. We're eventually just going to be able to type out all of our theories into some kind of AI, some kind of artificial intelligence, and it's going to run the world just great. Because everything important can be written down, because the universe is fundamentally measurable. But what if it's not? What if there's some immeasurable quality that can be held only in heart-to-heart communication? If that's the case, then we should be exploring that. And one of the things that we end up exploring is values, is ethics. The thing that happens when you have a guru-based organization is that pretty much everything starts to be about values and ethics. It's all people talk about. And it's burdensome, and it's irritating, and it's slow. Right? It's awful. It's all anyone talks about, because everyone's always trying to look out for the problem. Where's the problem here? What's the bad thing that you're doing? Everybody wants to know. And of course it's burdensome and difficult and annoying. And it's also good. It's the way it should be. This is exactly how it should be. You should both want to talk about it, want to know about it, on the one hand, and also have some way to judge it. Because if you look at the world nowadays, it's very difficult to know. Well, look at most organizations. If you look into most organizations, how ethical are they? You don't know. I can promise you that you don't know. Because no one knows. I engaged with some people who are very capable in this area and asked them, is there any way that we can create a database or some kind of algorithm that will be able to provide me and others with information about how ethical various companies are? So where do they get their products from? Where did those products come from? Where did those products come from? Where did the raw materials come from? How are they treating their workers? How are they treating the environment? On and on. Isn't there some way that we can just collect all this information and then rank the various companies? And then we know who to buy our stuff from. Wouldn't that be great? And they just looked at me that this is they didn't say it's impossible, but they said, right away I see countless issues that I have no idea how to solve. And I said, okay, but what if we had a lot of money, $1 million, $100 million? And they said, I don't think that would help much. The information either isn't there, or there's too much of an incentive to make sure it's not there. To make it not there if you started having such a system. And then they thought it through more and said, oh yeah, now I see a second layer of reasons that this isn't feasible. They didn't say it's impossible, but they said it's very difficult. Of course we have an issue of ethics in our world, that people aren't compassionate enough. People should be more compassionate. Of course, we're here in order to cultivate compassion. Compassion can be cultivated. It should be cultivated. Good that we're doing that. But nowadays we have a problem that is unique to this age. And that is that you have a lack of information. There isn't a way to gather the information about which company, which action, which choice is the best one within this economy. The economy is too complicated. It's much too complicated to gather that information anymore. Maybe we can do it. I'm still interested. I'm still in conversation with people to try to figure out a way to create such an algorithm or a database or whatever it will be. But no one can do it now. There isn't anyone alive who has this information right now. This isn't the same as it was a few thousand years ago, even a few hundred years ago, when someone like the Buddha could tell you don't kill, and then you wouldn't, and then of course the issue would be, are you deeply cultivating the compassion and the ethics in order to conclude that you shouldn't kill? But that's the only question, because you know perfectly well whether you're walking down the street and asking the butcher to kill an animal for you. You know that. You know exactly how many animals you asked the butcher to kill for you this week. You can measure it precisely. You always had that information. How many animals did you kill this week? You've got it. You know it. Nowadays, you bought some shoes. What does that mean? How many people did you pay to kill animals? And what does it mean to kill an animal? So the carbon that's released in the atmosphere, are we counting that? Well, obviously you should. So what does that mean? How many animals is that? Right? It's very confusing. How many animals in Australia? How many Africans did you just kill due to desertification because you bought those shoes? You don't know. Nowadays, we don't have a way of gathering that information. And so we come to this point around values that we see within organizations like this, an organization in which there's someone who's supposed to embody a set of values other than money, other than the ability to make money. When you have that situation, not only do you have a situation in which it's even easier to have a conversation about morality, values, ethics, but you also have a situation in which, at least within that community, because of the personal relationships, you can gather that information. You have the ability to know, how does such and such a person actually live? How do they really live? Really though? Well, if you live with them for a long time, you can find out. And I would suggest that if you have the choice between having an excellent spiritual teacher who lives far away and you don't know them very well, and maybe you talk to them on the phone once in a while, or you read their book, or you go to a retreat a year with them, and they're excellent. They're a true master whose personality fits you perfectly. If you have a choice between working with such a person and working with a pretty bad, a pretty bad spiritual teacher who doesn't have a lot of realization and is pretty hypocritical. Not completely hypocritical. They're not an evil person, they're just a bad. And they're not a really bad person, just a pretty bad person. They're not knowledgeable, they're not eloquent.
Bushy eyebrows too.
What?
Bushy eyebrows too.
Bushy eyebrows, which is irritating. So you have this sort of this poor to mediocre spiritual teacher who you actually know, and who speak to. And you can watch how they actually respond to real situations that actually arise. The real ones, not just the hypothetical ones about trolleys, but real issues that actually happen right after breakfast when they weren't expecting it. How do they actually respond? And then, more than that actually, more than that, how do they learn? So when mistakes are made, what happens next? It isn't just what do we do, it's how do we respond to the feedback that comes from what we do. How is that actually happening? So you know them, and then you know them the next day. And then you know them the next day. And then you know them the next year, and maybe the next decade. And eventually you come to see, okay, this is who the person actually is. And as the Buddha said, truly knowing someone, really knowing someone, happens over a long time, not over a short time. If you want to really know a person's character, that takes a long time. And beyond that, if you want to know a person's character, if you want to really know who they are, it happens through intimacy, not through distance. That's how it actually happens. We come to see a person, and through that we can see what it is that we can truly learn from them. Now, a lot of stuff we learn from them may be that they do things poorly and we want to do better. But that's valid. That's a valid kind of learning. That's a kind of learning that I needed to do a lot of in the monasteries that I was at, that those of us who live in community know what that's like. You see, we had a teacher who I thought one of his most brilliant teaching methods was recently who came from Japan. He's back in Japan now. And one of the nicest things he did was he kept on pointing out, well, now this is something you can do better than me. Because I don't do this thing very well, but my path would be I would have proceeded much further if I had done it. So I suggest to you that you do it. Who asked him that question?
Which one?
Did you ask him the question when you said, how do you do that? He was giving advice.
Oh, yeah.
What was it? Well, anyway, he was giving advice, and I think Autumn, you asked, right? And Autumn asked, so how are you practicing this now? He said, oh, I don't practice that. Right? He said, I don't know. I'm not good at that. I don't practice that very well. Isn't that what he said? Yeah, so I'm not taking the advice I'm giving you. Right? This is great. This is but you know him, right? You actually know him. Then put it alternatively. You're reading a book that's so eloquent and magnificent and beautiful and compelling. You're convinced. But the fact of the matter is that that book has 100% purely one-way communication. One-way communication. The statement is being made. Can you move that clock so I can see it? A statement is being made the entire time that you are, put it up there, just move it one way or the other. You can figure this out. So, the statement is being made all the time you're reading it. That what the teacher has to say is important, and you should listen. And what you have to say is not important, and the teacher shouldn't listen. That's the statement that's made due to the medium of the communication. Because you can say something to the book and no one is listening to you. You can say something back. Sometimes I do. You know, sometimes I yell back at these things. I was just yelling last night. Yes, I was. Yes. And a sutra book.
I yelled back.
What?
I said nothing.
You yelled back, yeah, but it didn't yell back. Oji was reading me something from a sutra book. I didn't like the translation, so I screamed at it. Terrible translation. It's wrong. Translation is not commentary. Okay? They're two different things. So, I was frustrated. No one cares. No one cares, because no one's there. So you have this relationship with the book, but no one's there. And as far as you know, they're hypocritical. As far as you know, they don't really believe it. As far as you know, they're just trying to sell a book. You don't know. Even in the case of someone who's hypocritical, who you know, and you can say, are you a hypocrite? you then know they're hypocrite. That's a much better situation. That's an excellent situation, right? You were inspired. That was your favorite thing that happened his whole visit. That's what she said. That's what Autumn told me. It was my favorite thing that happened his entire visit. Because the thing that he did demonstrate, even though it wasn't, it's so funny, we don't even remember what he was advising. But the thing that he demonstrated in that moment was honesty. Was here we are together, we're walking this path. We're in this thing, right? I don't have to be perfect, you don't have to be perfect. We're walking this path, here we go. And that was the feeling, the sentiment. I still can't see it. That was the sentiment that was conveyed. So it becomes very important to get to know the person. And just turn it 30 degrees. So the reason this matters is that someone else told me, you say that this spiritual teacher, this guru, is an exemplar, or at least ought to be an exemplar of certain values. But that's trivial. Wasn't that the word you used? I think you said trivial. You, Justin. I believe you used the word trivial. What?
It was a few weeks ago.
It was a few weeks ago. You don't deny it. Can't deny it. It's trivial that the leader of an organization would exemplify the values, would demonstrate the values of the organization. Because that's true for every organization. It's just, what are the values? That's the question. If you have an organization that values making money, then the person who's in the top position, who's supposed to, the CEO, the person who's supposed to be the personality of the organization, should be someone who knows how to make money, because that's the value of the organization. So you have this organization, they're supposed to be demonstrating kindness or something like that, because that's the value of a spiritual organization. So obviously that's the case. Of course that's the case. It should be the case. Why wouldn't it be the case? You're not saying anything important here. Now I'm drifting from your exact words. So this is not trivial. On the contrary, sometimes things are so obvious that they seem trivial. But just because something's obvious doesn't make it trivial. That you have an organization that is explicitly dedicated to something other than making money, that's not trivial. That you can find people who are supposed to, who are held accountable for demonstrating, embodying those values, that's not trivial. To have a community that is empowered to constantly watch for the demonstration or lack thereof of these values, not trivial! This matters. This is important. This ought to be the basis of our lives. This should be the way we live. This is it. What else are we doing? You're in an organization. Here you are in an organization, and you're saying, oh yeah, of course, you just make a bunch of money. Yeah, sure. What? You can't just let that slip by. You can't just, okay, that's true. That is obvious but not trivial. To be in an organization in which people care about these things, in which they're made explicit, that's the essence of this type of organization. That's what it's about. That's the significance of it. That's the point. That's the thing that makes it what it is, and that's the good thing about it. So you have this situation in which certain values are held up as good. They're constantly being examined. The people who are supposed to be demonstrating them, embodying them, living them, these people are examined by the people who are attempting to be learning them. So that you have a cooperative relationship in the maintenance of some value other than transforming nature into numbers, which is basically what our economy does. We have these numbers called money, and our goal is to transform the living mystery of this planet into those numbers. That's what we do with our lives. This is obvious, and it's not trivial. To have an organization that says no to that. No, that's not what we're doing. On the contrary, we're doing this. And we're going to set it up in such a way that people can be held accountable if they do or don't embody these values. This is significant, not trivial. To set it up so that the scope, the power of that organization is constrained in some way so that the living relationships, the living connections between the people are the thing that hold up the love, the wisdom, that gives validity to the power that it has. This is not trivial. This matters. And to be in a situation like this, in which there are actual connections, as I was talking about before, in which we can actually disagree with each other about this, in which we can have friction, in which we can debate, in which we can fight, in which we can be uncomfortable with whatever confusion we have around this, so that we come to the point when a collective intelligence is capable of lifting all of us up into a living practice. This is not trivial. Not trivial. It matters. And in my experience, being with a person, living with a person who in a creative way, in a creative, inventive, humble, open-minded, constantly transforming way gives life to these values within personal relationships. That allowed me, for the first time in my life, to consider the possibility that values, that friendship, that love is real. Is a real thing. Is a real thing. Something real. You can write out the word love. It's not the same thing as feeling love. And the feeling of love isn't the same thing as the action of love. To directly encounter that, to live with it, to be able to test it, to lean on it, to try to break it and fail. This changes our lives. This should be, must be, the basis of an ethical world. So please, take relationships seriously. Consider the possibility that a bad teacher who you know will do more good for you than a good teacher who you don't know. Because it's in the friendship, the knowing of the person, that we are transformed. That we are enlivened by the love of the relationship. Consider that possibility, that this living teaching isn't written down, that it is so obvious that it matters. There's something in this love, this connection, that's so obvious that we miss it. It's so obvious that it matters. Please, consider this carefully. Consider this carefully. It's essential that you consider this carefully. I don't know what else to say than that. A lot of you hear me say that so often. Consider this carefully, consider this carefully, consider this carefully. Right? You hear me say it all the time, right? Yeah. I say it a lot. I don't know how else to say it. But I can tell you this. On that day when I had tea and heard a bunch of relatively boring words, my life was changed. My life was changed because I met someone who knew the answer to the question that I was asking. Yes, it's important for you to find someone who knows the answer to the question that you're asking. I had met lots of people, I'd read lots of books. I hadn't met someone with the answer to the question that I was asking, and so my life wasn't changed. But a lot of people meet Harada Roshi, and their lives aren't changed. Why? 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 Why?
He doesn't have the answer to the question they're asking.
I doubt that. I'm pretty sure he has the answer to the question that anyone's asking. But why doesn't it change your life? Yes?
You're looking at the words too hard?
Are they looking at the words too hard, perhaps? Why are they looking at the words too hard? Yes? Why?
Do you want me to answer that question?
No.
They're not able to let the love in.
Well, sometimes they're not able to let the love in, that's true. He's a very loving guy, even though he doesn't look that way.
Well, just
But
because
yes.
you're loving doesn't mean someone
No.
will let it in.
That's true. People don't necessarily love it in.
I think you was ready to get up.
Why was I ready?
I don't know.
Ah, you
It's
do know.
inside.
You were
You
asking.
know perfectly well. What?
You were asking.
Who said that? Yes. That,
Yeah, whatever.
it's because people aren't asking. The question has to meet the answer. Just the answer has no meaning. The answer is given life by the question. In the same way that the question is given life by the answer. You have to question, investigate, examine, doubt, with desperation, with urgency. Ask these questions. Look at this closely. Ask and ask and ask. If there isn't that basis of a deep inquiry, then it doesn't matter who gives you the answer or how well it's given to you, or even with how much love it's given to you. We won't let that love in, we won't let the answer in, we won't open up to it if we're not questioning, if we're not examining. And this is what's offered by a living relationship. A real question that's being asked for the first time. No matter what book you read, it won't actually answer your question, because the book is only answering questions that have already been asked. But what about the question that you have to ask that no one has ever asked? That's the one that you have to ask. And in a living relationship, that question can be answered. Let us make use of that connection, that love, that relationship, in order to create a community that can create a culture that can be of great service to the world. Take a moment to straighten up. Sit up tall. Have these nice chairs now. Allow us to sit up straight. And having elevated your spirits by elevating your posture, settle in, relax. Calm your body. Allow this magnificent earth, through its gravitation, to pull your body down into it. Let that relax you and settle you into an awareness of body sensations. Whatever you're feeling at this time, pay attention to that. begin, be sure that you have straightened up and then settled into your posture, and then attend to body sensations. Whatever you're feeling right now, feel that as it is, allowing it to come and go without resistance as you pay attention to it. And as you attend to body sensations, investigate. Investigate your body, the various sensations in your body. Ask, what feeling is arising right now? What feeling is arising right now? And what feeling is arising right now? The feeling that's arising at this moment has not arisen before. The answer is always new, unpredictable. If we have the sense that we know what we're feeling before we felt it, then that's simply a lack of investigation. It's a lack of examination. This sensation is new, unknown. By the time we know the answer to the question, that answer is gone. And so we can ask again, immediately, what sensation is arising now? And what sensation is arising now? If we reach a point when it's difficult to investigate further, this is common, it's okay if that happens for you. It may seem as if you already know. And then you look and it's true. What you thought was going to be there is there. Okay, very good. That's okay. Look in a different part of your body that you haven't been paying attention to. Some other part of your body. A certain space between a certain two toes that you haven't happened to investigate yet tonight. Maybe you're paying attention to the breath sensation that's coming in and going out of your nose. But did you pay attention to that specific spot 2/3 of the way up your left nostril? What about there? What are you experiencing there? In this way, we learn how to question, to investigate, to wonder. continue to investigate body sensation with your body. Use your body to investigate body sensations. Your body feels them. Investigate with your body. For now, don't investigate with your mind if you can investigate with your body. If you don't find a way to investigate body sensations with your body, then use your mind to do so. But if possible, use your body to investigate body sensation. And by doing this, we cultivate the ability to wonder to the point of abiding in wonder. Each next moment completely unknown, unpredicted, undefined, felt completely. Pure wonder. That simply means that we are investigating and that we are not predicting. As we do this, we realize for ourselves that our bodies are alive. And from this place of investigation and wonder, if you'd like, shift the question asked with your body, in your body. Shift the question to what is the end of this body? What is the end of my body? This body here, it's feeling, breathing, living. What is its end? Ask in your body. Within a state of mind of investigation and wonder. Don't let this become a mental question. Ask from your body, in your body. What is the end of my body? Of course, if you'd prefer not to ask this question, you don't need to. Feel free to do any of the other practices, or even some other unrelated practice if you'd like. But you're invited, if you wish, to settle yourself in your body, feel your body, investigate body sensations, and then with your body, in your body, ask, what is the end of my body? And if you'd like, continue with that or with whatever practice you've been doing. And if you'd like, ask about this mind that has been aware of your body, that has been asking this question, hearing this discourse. If you'd like, feel free to ask with your body, in your body, feeling your body, knowing your body with your body. Feel free to shift the question to what is the end of my mind? This mind that thinks and knows, understands, comprehends, conceives, manipulates, questions. What is the end of this mind? What is the cessation of mind? Once again, I'll repeat it because it's important to hear. With your body, in your body, ask, if you'd like, what is the end of my mind? Any concept that you may find as an answer to this question is obviously not the answer to this question. So you can just set that aside. And once again ask, with your body, in your body, what is the end of my mind? it time for conversation? Yes.
Kind of I wish that I didn't feel called to ask this question. I wish this wasn't even
Uh-huh.
in our cultural understanding, but
Yeah.
you were talking about having a bad teacher
Yeah.
that you actually can talk to and interact with and breathe the same air with
Yeah.
is better than having a good teacher you're reading from a book or not in the same room with. And
Yeah.
then for me, there's a difference between a bad teacher who's mediocre, maybe they still have work to do, it's just kind of maybe frustrating or annoying, whatever.
Yeah.
And a harmful teacher.
Oh, yes, good.
So there's so much.
Great question.
Yeah, so there's so much abuses of power, even in the spiritual communities of our
Mhm.
country.
Mhm.
So how do we know the difference between the two?
Yeah, good. Well, I was careful in my phrasing.
Yeah.
I didn't say a bad teacher. I said a pretty bad teacher. What?
Very careful, right?
Yeah, I was actually quite careful. Believe it or not, I was careful.
What's the difference between the two?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a pretty bad teacher isn't that bad. So by that I meant that they haven't crossed the line over into doing harm in certain very pernicious ways. Yes, so they're not, physically abusive or something like that. They're not stealing. They're not breaking what you consider to be the foundational ethical codes. Okay, and you should have that. It's important that you have a sense of what someone would do that would result in you leaving the relationship. Okay? So I'm not avoiding your question. I'm just giving a little bit of background, because I think it's important. I'm actually going to give a whole talk on this, just so you know. Remember, this is in one of the write-ups that I've sent. There are going to be several more of these, as far as I can tell. And so this is a question of trust. Should you trust someone, and how hard it is to know who to trust. The first thing to say, though, is that it's good if you have something that you are clear on. If a person does this, then I'm gone. And that you really take that seriously, and that you retain control over your life in that way. I often say that to the extent that you're clear on, to the extent that you trust your assessment of ethics, you're in a position to trust someone else to clarify your ethics. Okay, so a lot of the time, in the same way that if there's a fulcrum or a teeter-totter, the teeter-totters that are now apparently illegal?
What?
Yeah, you can't have them in schools anymore, right? Because kids get hurt. That's what happens? Oh, you're supposed to be the resident experts on the topic. Come on. So teeter-totters aren't as popular now as they used to be. I think maybe kids go under them, or a big kid maybe get their hand stuck, or a big kid throws the little kid off or something. I don't know what happens. But in any case, so there's a balance point, and then there's the necessity to keep that balance, unlike a teeter-totter that goes up and down. In this case, we're trying to keep balance. So it seems like you're going in different directions. You trust yourself a certain amount, and you trust someone else to change the very things about yourself that you trust. It's a little confusing, but it's true nonetheless that you should have a code of ethics that you believe in, that you demand that a person follows. And to the extent that you're clear on that, and you really trust that, you can then trust someone else. Because you have this to say, you did this thing that I don't believe in, I'm out. So you have this high standard that you come in with. that you're capable of making decisions according to. Go ahead.
That sounds like you need to be a diamond in order for another stronger diamond to sharpen you. And I worry about the people who, it's so important and so challenging to learn boundaries and learn what our values are.
Yeah.
How do we have a training ground to do that safely? And I mean,
Well, this is the hard part. And I'm saying, if from here you can only go this far, then you can only go this far into trust of someone else.
Yeah.
That's just the situation. It's unsafe to go further than that. So you have to know how clear you are on your code of ethics and how much you trust your ability to make real decisions according to it. Only to that extent should you put your life in someone else's hands. Only to the extent that you have put your life into your hands should you put your life into someone else's hands. The good news is that even though it seems as if these are contrary, opposite directions, actually they're supportive. They balance each other. They hold each other. And so as you're clear, you can trust someone to clarify you, and so you do become more clear.
Yeah.
And that means that you can trust, that means you have a better ability to choose who to trust, how much. And so you can do that more. And it keeps going in this way until you get to the point where people who have enormous self-confidence, who are very clear in their ethics, moral, people with great fortitude and wisdom in their ability to make good choices, compassionate choices, those people are then capable of almost entirely giving themselves over to someone else. And so then it's a healthy thing to bow down before someone, do what they say without any questioning. Because your ability to question is so refined and sophisticated. This constant examination is so subtle, so rarefied, that you're able to then drop in completely to someone else's control. Yes? But if these aren't balanced, either way, so if you're very clear but you're not willing to give yourself over to someone else, then that's good that you're clear, but it's likely that that will devolve into ego, into just your own perspective, and then you're really smart and people don't like you much, reasonably. You're annoying to be around. You know what I mean? Because you know what's right and wrong. Well, you know, who likes that? No, that's not a good friend. So, so there's that side, and then there's the other side where you give yourself over to someone else, but then you're in a very dangerous position. And to a certain extent, it's their fault for having accepted that. You know, a good teacher will be able to see that that's happening and will prevent you from doing it. They'll, even if you want to, they should be able to come up with clever ways of making it hard for you to trust them. You know, it can actually be a sense of kindness. Because it's not, you're not in a place yet where you should trust them, and so they may find ways of making that hard for you. Lots of different clever ways. But it's also your fault because you put yourself in that position, and at the end of the day, you have to take responsibility for that. So that I know hasn't answered your question yet.
No, I feel clear about.
Great.
I can trust others to the extent I can trust myself.
Great. Your question was, how can I know if I should trust others, though? What are the qualities of those people? Correct? But I'm happy to set that aside. No problem.
I'm very interested if someone else has another question.
Another question, yes.
What's your take on teachers like Sasaki Roshi and Shogun Champa who seemingly have done immense good and immense harm?
Yeah, great. So this series of talks is really about that, and one of the talks is going to be about specifically these issues of sexual misconduct. I'm saving that a little bit because I want to give a pretty good background to my, as you say, take on these topics. But absolutely, there are people who do a great deal of harm. Yes, teachers who do a great deal of harm. One of the things that I'm saying is that, first of all, they didn't do that much harm compared to a lot of what's going on in the world. And we have to be serious about that. Because, and I know it can seem trivial. Well, yeah, of course they didn't. But actually, wait. Because we are engaging with organizations on a daily basis who are doing more harm. And for us to pretend, and for us to call that trivial is to absolve to irrationally and illegitimately absolve ourselves of responsibility there. We are engaged in organizations on a daily basis that are doing more harm than that, and yet we spend our time criticizing. We are supporting more harm than that on a daily basis, and yet we spend our time criticizing this thing. Now, that matters, okay? It's a trick. This system is pointing your attention to that so that you'll turn your attention away from this. It really matters. It's not just some, well, you know, sure, they didn't do that much harm, but they still did harm, wait, let's still talk about it more. The amount of harm that they did and can do, given the structure of the organization, is relatively small. That matters. Beyond that, okay, so first of all, the system as it is asking us, demanding of us, that we turn our attention to these scandals. Okay? To protect itself from that same critique, from an even stronger critique being pointed at it. That matters. Now the system is this, who's doing it? You can't really say who's doing it, but it's happening. A system that survives does this kind of thing. That has these characteristics. And so this is a very powerful machine, and so it has to have these qualities. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, one of the it's a kind of illusion. One of the reasons that more scandals arise in this situation is that the situation has the positive characteristic of asking us to examine its ethics. So the thing that makes it trustworthy is the thing that appears to make it untrustworthy. The very thing that makes it trustworthy is that we are asked, we're actually invited to critique its ethics. Okay? This system doesn't ask us to critique its ethics at all. And so we don't as much. And so we don't notice the problems. But that is exactly why it's not a trustworthy system. So if you look at these various communities, there's an if you look at how large these communities are, the amount that's being done in general by them, it's very small compared to the rest of the economy, the rest of the society, right? If you look at all of the things that they're doing, these harmful situations are still relatively unusual. Relatively not unusual, I'm not saying, but it's not the majority of what's happening. And yet that is the majority of what we look at.
I notice I'm much more critical of conflicting dead gurus than my usage of a Chase debit card.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And that's what I'm pointing out. So thanks for putting it in those terms. And so that's a lot of what I'm trying to point out in this talk. So thanks for saying what I've said over a month in a few seconds. That's well done. So we should be aware that there's this illusion happening, this trick happening. All of that said, still, I'm not avoiding the fact that, yes, harm has been done. I've talked to people in those communities, though. Most people coming out of those communities are very grateful and feel like more good was done than harm, and they defend those situations. Most people that I've talked to from those communities. So, that's significant. A lot of good apparently was done. I am one who is also very critical of those actions, okay? I happen to be, that's why I've talked to all these people, because I go and want to investigate and say, I think this is terrible. And they say, no, it isn't terrible. I say, I think it's terrible. And they say, well, you weren't there. I say, sure, it's still terrible. And we have this conversation, because I am critical of it, and I think we should be critical of it. We should look at it closely. What would I say? Well, there are a lot of things to say. One is that it turns out that this path is hard. It turns out that there are a lot of different aspects of the path that we need to work on. And so we can say, well, these teachers didn't have sufficient clarity of mind. And they should have, but they didn't, but they should have, but they didn't. We also can do another thing, though, which I think it's about time that we do. Right? Wouldn't you say, Sanjin?
I would say Soryu.
Yes. So, I think you would, actually. I think you would say what I'm about to say. You know what I'm about to say?
Hit it.
The damage done was done to a certain extent by the Guru, but not entirely. The community is to a large extent responsible for the harm that was done. One of the reasons that we want, that we like, one of these unfortunate reasons that we like the Guru model, the spiritual teacher model, is that it's a way to self-infantilize. How's that? It's a way to conclude that, it's a way to make it so that nothing's our fault. Because they have all the power, so they have all the responsibility. Which means I don't have any of the power and none of the responsibility. So whatever happens isn't my fault. And that can feel very comforting. It's not. It's not comforting. It's abusive. We are throwing away our lives by throwing away our power. And the fact is, you can't throw away your power. Even if you throw your power, you have the power to do that, and that's what you use to throw it away. So, so it's still an act that you took. Communities need to be responsible for these things. And one of the most important things that we should learn from these cases is how it is that a community that doesn't take that responsibility is destroyed by their irresponsibility. All that has to happen is that the one teacher is destroyed and the community disintegrates. The community doesn't want to disintegrate. And so the immature thing to do is to try to cover up the problem. But happily, that doesn't work very well in the system. It's not effective. You know about this stuff. I mean, let me be honest. The amount of harm done by these teachers is very similar to the amount of harm done that you know about. That's amazing. In fact, I know of two significant cases, in which the amount of harm that was actually done is less than the amount you know about. Because I know the case. And I know that a lot of the things that happened, and even the teacher admitted to, didn't really happen. The teacher just wanted people to feel better, and was willing to sacrifice himself so that people would feel better. And so he just admitted stuff that he didn't do. So this sort of thing should be very encouraging. I'm not saying that these problems don't happen. I'm bringing up this whole series of lectures in order to eventually, I'm getting there, tell all of you, you got to take responsibility for this community. Because as I've often said, and I think at this point we're able to transcend this, I've often said that this community seems to have a plan A and a plan B. Have you heard me say this?
No.
Yeah, plan A and plan B. So plan A is I'm perfect. Plan B is disaster. And neither plan is good. Neither is a good plan. And neither is well thought through. Yes? If you examine it, you'll find flaws in both plans. So to have the sense of so-and-so person should be perfect, this isn't just harmful in that it infantilizes us. in that it gives us permission to not be responsible, to not take responsibility for the whole community ourselves, which of course then prevents us from rising to a place of true trustworthiness, in which case we could be a leader and a teacher and someone who truly serves. Okay? Not only is it a problem that we use the guru's position to prevent ourselves from personal growth, from taking personal action and therefore experiencing personal growth. You see what I'm saying? Say, oh, you're amazing, I don't have to do anything, so I don't grow, so then the opposite of what's supposed to happen happens. It isn't a problem just for that reason. That's a big problem. And the good news is, again, it doesn't work. The community falls apart when people collaborate in order to maintain these unethical behaviors, which in all these cases happened. So the community is invariably involved in maintaining these unethical acts. So it isn't just a problem because people are infantilized and then they, due to their own irresponsibility, cause the destruction of the community. Again, good news, the community is destroyed, right? And so we can learn from that and we can do better. It isn't just that. It's something actually much deeper than that. The problem is more significant than that. And the problem is that when you have this sense that someone should be perfect, okay? When you have that sense, well, something I say is that the only things you can legitimately call perfect are things that you cannot legitimately call imperfect. So for example, you can say, oh, the sunset is perfect. You can't say, oh, the sunset, imperfect. No one says that. Right? You say, oh, it's an imperfect sunset again today. You don't say that. That's why you can say the sunset is perfect. Okay? In the same way, you can look upon people as perfect, but not if you can look upon people as imperfect. If you have this sense that here's this perfect standard which someone could fall from, if you have that sense, then what you're doing is you're simplifying a living person to a concept that is probably your own emotionally motivated fixation. Well, that person is a real person with an actual life. And they shouldn't dumb it down to your idea of perfect. Your idea of, is it time? No, it's not time.
We're ending a little early tonight.
Oh, you have to
Right,
tell me
beforehand.
this. This is not the time to tell me. So, let me finish this. So, you can sit down. So, responsibility. You have to take responsibility. You should have told me. See? It's working. So we all have responsibility for this. So if you ask a person to confine their life to your idea of perfect, if that's your strategy for choosing a teacher or a friend, then you've taken a living person and destroyed their life. That's your goal anyway, to turn a living life into this little concept that you're holding on to for your own ends. And when you do that, when you objectify them in that way, which, as I say, the guru system tends to prevent, because you actually know the person, and they fight back. They say, no, I'm not the person who you think I am. And so stop it. You say, yes, you are. You say, no, I'm not. And it doesn't feel good for you to think I am. Stop it. You say, no, but I know you are. So that can last for years. And then eventually you grow up and you wake up. Right? So as long as you're not grown up and woken up, then you're holding them in this way and you're actually living down here. And what that has done is produce the sense that they're actually made of something different from you. They're made of this perfect substance and you're made of some imperfect substance, which means that whatever they're representing has, even if it's a good thing, you have made unattainable by yourself. You have made it so that you can't attain it. You've made them into something that you're not. It isn't just that you've made them into something that they're not. You've made them into something that you're not, which means that you can't become the thing that you want them to be. which is to say you've made yourself into something that can't become what you really are. Yes? So it's extremely dangerous to start engaging in that perfection game. Okay? It's not about that. We have to awaken to that which is actually perfect. Not just conceptualize and attempt to confine someone to what we think is perfect. Okay? And that's done through actual relationship in community. And that community then can take real responsibility over these real issues, and in that way can flourish.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh yes, thank you, Sanchin. Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Joseph, Daniel, Greg, and Kelly for all of your help with this talk. I appreciate it. Very, very kind of you. It makes it so easy for me when you give feedback. You write the talk for me, so thank you very much.